Today's episode is sponsored by Organic Living. I had the opportunity to try out organic moisture absorbers, and I'm completely hooked on them. I've put them in every area of my house and car where there's even a hint of moisture. My favorite part? They're all natural, so I don't have to worry about the kids or the dog getting into them. They're perfect for under sinks, in closets, holiday storage bins, dressers, and pantries. And since they're made of non-toxic minerals, you can use them virtually anywhere. With a 100% satisfaction guarantee, you have no reason not to try them out. You can visit organicliving.com to learn more and place an order. Also, Jacksonville Momcast is now on Patreon. If you'd like to support the show, visit our show notes or patreon.com/Jacksonville Momcast. You can support us for as little as $1 a month and help us produce great content to go out to you. Welcome to episode 19. Our guest today is Maria Inoa. Maria is a Jacksonville mom and the owner of Maria Inoa Coaching. As a relationship coach, we're going to chat with her about common stressors in a relationship and in a marriage. And she also shares with us some tips to keep marriages healthy throughout the years. Thanks for listening. Welcome to the Jacksonville Momcast, a podcast dedicated to real stories for real parents. Each episode, we'll chat with local Jacksonville moms and cover topics to help you navigate mom life on the First Coast. Thanks for joining us as we tackle all things motherhood and more with a focus on the 904. Well, today we have Maria Inoa, and Maria is a relationship coach. So Maria, why don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I am a Florida native. I was born and raised in Daytona Beach, went to Florida State University for my undergrad and for graduate school, moved around the state a little bit, and then came to Jacksonville in 2018, just sort of like the stars aligned and we landed here. And we love it. And so I'm married to Tony. He is a nurse. We've been married for 10 years. And then we have an 8-year-old boy and a 5-year-old girl.
That's great. And so tell us a little bit about your work as a relationship coach.
Sure. So I've been a licensed therapist for over 15 years, and I focus a lot on trauma. So the coaching came about through sort of COVID. It was extra push, but I would get I would get women that were coming to me that didn't necessarily need therapy per se. They were in it was either a long-term relationship or a marriage typically. They were struggling. They needed some guidance. And then with everything with COVID going on, one of the things with therapy that's frustrating is that we can't cross state lines. So there's like this whole world of people that you'd like to help or offer your services to, and you can't do that unless you're licensed in the other states. So it was really frustrating for me with COVID, people just need support. They need help. There's, people we're more willing to seek out support and help with everything going on. So that's sort of where the coaching came along through COVID, through seeing this need from women that I was getting contacted by, or that, I was seeing in therapy, that there just needed something. They needed this just extra level of guidance and support and coaching through the relationship issue that they were experiencing.
And so since you brought up COVID, let's talk about that for a second. You mentioned a little bit how it impacted your business. How has it impacted relationships, for better or worse? It's been a long 18 months. A lot of us are dealing with spouses that may be home all the time now, and children who also may be home all the time now. I do feel like we're finally starting to get back to somewhat normal, but how has COVID impacted just relationships in general? And what are you seeing?
So I think that, just for everybody, I say that no one is unscathed by the pandemic. Even people who seemingly are doing well. It affects everybody. It's an extra stressor for everyone. So like you said, there was just all these like changes for like the children being home, maybe they're being homeschooled, or the stress of, are they going to have to quarantine? Then what do we do? Just shuffle. And then yes, like spouses being home, trying to work together, trying to figure out, where are you going to work? Where am I going to work? How are we going to do all this? I think it's just such a intense stress on relationships in general, and that I think just blindsided us to where, I think a lot of people just were like, whoa, like grasping at like straws for coping skills and trying to communicate in very stressful conditions, usually. And so I think it's really strained a lot of relationships. I think that there are, I think people are reaching out, like I had mentioned, people are reaching out more for help and seeing that they need, help at this pandemic. I think people are more open to it. That was what I was trying to say. Like, I think the pandemic has shown that, okay, I need some extra support. I can't do this on myself. Like the pandemic is, just threw a loop in everybody's sort of plans in life. So definitely, I think there's a lot. I think it really pushed, some relationships to like sort of like the tipping point. And I think that people had to really focus and become self-aware to be able to keep the relationship healthy as best as possible through the pandemic.
I think that's some good insight. And I do think one of the benefits that has come out of the last 18 months is that with virtual becoming almost the norm now, I feel like there's probably a lot more people accessing and having the ability to access help. I mean, therapy used to be 2 years ago was you went to a therapist's office, and now you can Zoom in for, once a week, once a day. I just think that access has really fundamentally changed in our society.
Definitely. Yes.
I was just going to say, so tell us a little bit about how a coaching session works with you. What does that look like?
So depending on, I have a couple of different packages that I offer in terms of length of 3 months or 6 months. Typically, we meet every other week. We do it through Zoom so we can see each other, hear each other, depending on what sort of our goal, 1 or 2 goals where our focus is for our time together. We just sort of like check in. We talk about the last session. There was usually going to be things that they are working on in between our times that we meet. So we just sort of check in on all that and just keep pushing forward to the goal, taking those little action steps, troubleshooting things, talking through things, but just keeping that goal that we talked about and we decided on initially, keeping that goal in mind.
And it sounds like it's a pretty personalized and individualized process.
Very much so, because just no 2 people are alike, no 2 relationships are alike. There can be similarities, but then there's always circumstances that are different. And so I think it really is important to not do like cookie cutter, but listen to the woman and hear what she's going through and hear what she wants and wants to be different. And so we can kind of put together sort of a goal and personalize it all the way through to what they need and what's most helpful.
And so who do you typically work with? I know you mentioned, I know you primarily coach women, but do you do men and families and couples, or is it strictly woman focused for you?
So I typically just work with the women. They're typically women in their 30s and 40s. They're usually in either a relationship, a longer term relationship, or marriage. And it's typically a woman who is not happy in her relationship. There's things going on. She's doing all that she can. Typically, it's the other person is not meeting them for whatever reason, is not willing to change, not meeting them where they need to be. And so the woman is like trying everything, all the things. I've just worked with women who worked for I've tried for years, 5 years, 10 years. And they're sort of just running out of steam. And it's sort of like, okay, what are we going to do now? And helping them through all of that.
Let's talk a little bit about the work you do coaching women to help them find healthy relationships. So talk to us a little bit about that. The woman that's not necessarily in a relationship trying to improve it, but the one looking for a healthy relationship.
So with those women, I love it. It's sort of like this idea. I mean, it depends again on where the woman is, but a lot of the women I work with struggle with not taking the time to reflect in between their relationships. So they're just sort of like staying on the hamster wheel and repeating things, or they're attracting a similar person who is really not the healthiest. And then they're just kind of caught in this cycle of just getting hurt and being frustrated and feeling defeated. So a lot of it is trying to sort of like slow down. Let's just tap the brakes. Let's pause. Let's look at what we've got. What are the past relationships? What do they look like? What are the past people you've been with look like? A lot of times it's, I know like it's kind of like cliche and you've heard this, but it's like you really do have to have that love for yourself in order to attract a healthy person. Like you've got to work on yourself to get yourself not perfect. We're never going to be perfect. We always have flaws, but to get yourself to a place where you feel some level of wholeness, not feeling like you're super broken and this person's going to make it better, because that's not going to last, that you can't expect someone to make you happy. That's not their job. So it's a lot of that, working with women on slowing down. Let's evaluate, let's kind of reflect on where have you been, what the relationship would look like, how they feel about themselves, self-compassion, self-love. I know those terms are used a lot, but it's just really important for the woman to have a level of that love for herself. And a lot of women I run into, like they think they do, or maybe a little bit, but there's some missing, like some big gaps in that we have to work on.
I think that all women, regardless of your relationship status, can probably relate to those tips.
Yes.
So you talked about how you were a therapist and now you're focusing more on coaching. What is the difference between being in therapy and seeing a therapist and doing some coaching?
So the therapy, I still do it, but the therapy is pretty specialized that I do. But therapy really in general is very much focused on heavily in the past. Like we sort of, I think of it like we stay a lot in the past, where coaching is really more present, future focused. Yes, we talk about the past, but we don't sit in it for the periods of time, kind of like what therapy does. Like therapy to me is about what's going on now and what the person wants, but it's usually a lot about what's happened in the past. What do we need to heal? Let's talk about that. And not everybody wants to do that. And so with the coaching, it's more of like, what do we got going on right now? And what do you want moving forward? And yes, we'll like dip our toe into the past as we need to discuss it because it's important, but we're not going to sit in the past and focus on that.
I think that's such a great explanation. And I'm so glad you I just feel like what a great way to explain it, because I honestly didn't know the answer to that. And so I feel like that just opened my eyes to the difference between the two.
Good. I'm so glad.
So what are some of the signs of an unhealthy relationship? What are those, even early warning signs that people should look out for if you're entering a new relationship, but also people in long-term relationships? What are some of those unhealthy habits that you may have gotten into or unhealthy characteristics that you need to kind of be aware of?
Okay. So I think that there's just so many, and I think that it's so easy for people initially to, just be in that like, oh, he's so hot, or she's so attractive and blah, blah, blah. And you're just in that infatuation. So you miss the signs. But I think things to look out for would be someone who is needy or clingy. And that can be different. Like I said, gets like a broad spectrum, but someone who wants to see you all the time. I know it's hard at the beginning. I'm not a big fan of people seeing each other every day. I think it just depends on the people, but I think that it's very important that you have your own life. I mean, you're joining lives, but you also are a person and need to have your own life and your own friends and kind of bridge everything together. So I think someone who is particularly clingy, maybe needy, wants to know where you are, what you're doing, who you're with. You didn't text me, in 3 hours, things like that. So those signs, I think substance abuse, watching out for, and that's, something that people can easily kind of hide, but someone who may have a substance abuse issue that hasn't been addressed. And so obviously that's going to greatly affect the relationship. So seeing how often someone is, going out and drinking with their buddies or whatever, or drinking at home, any type of, this is a given, but any type of abuse, but not just physical. It's really like the ones that are more deceptive. There's like the emotional, the verbal abuse, but also the manipulation that sometimes people will do to like try to control. It's so sneaky that it's hard to catch it sometimes. But those are all, of course, major red flags. I think not just the clinginess, but also not spending time together. If the person is not making efforts to spend time with you, or they're secretive, or they're like sort of can't see their social media. They hide their phone. They do these things, just secretive things where they're not open and honest. I think that's a red flag as well. So those are the ones that stand out to me the most early on.
And what are some tips you have for women who believe they are currently in an unhealthy relationship? It's easy to say, get out of it, but
yeah,
it's not always that easy. So what are some things you suggest?
Well, I mean, I think that the thing is can the issue be fixed? I think a lot of it is, are both parties willing to address things to make it better? So if they're, and depending on what, I mean, some, like if someone seems to have a drinking problem, or you're concerned about how much they drink, and I always am a big fan of like, okay, communicate your concerns to them. There's got to be some level of communication first, where you can approach them in a calm and, from a place of love. But people aren't always willing or ready. And at some point you have to ask yourself, okay, am I wanting to stay with this person through whatever they're going through? Or, but they're not maybe willing to get help. Then you have to ask yourself, okay, do I want to stay in this? Is this what I want my life to be? They're not willing to meet me. They're not willing to go and get any type of help. Okay. One person can only do so much. It really takes both to make, obviously, the relationship work.
And so you touched a little on different types of abuse. Talk to us a little bit about when a relationship goes from being unhealthy to being dangerous. What should a woman do, or what can she do? Are there any resources you recommend if a woman does find herself in a dangerous situation?
It's so hard, because I know it's just like one of those things where it's so much easier said than done. I mean, I can say that she needs to get out. She needs to contact someone. I think and I can't remember the name of the Jacksonville shelter. I know there's the Betty Griffin House in St. Augustine, which is a really good one. But trying to reach out for support, or reaching out to one friend or one family member, if no one knows, to like just pull someone into your support circle, and then trying to figure out a plan, asking them for help to help you figure out a plan to get out. And especially if, there's kids involved, which I know a lot of times there can be. Again, I know it's so easy to be like, well, you have to get out. I know there's a lot of, it's like you're trying to untangle yourself from a web. But I would say trying to get somebody into your support circle, if at all possible, letting them know so you're not feeling completely alone. You feel like you have someone there, and trying to figure out a plan. And I know that can take time too. It's not like you're, okay, I want to leave, boom, I'm gone. Some of these people, you just cannot do that. You have to have a strategy to get out safely.
And we'll put links to some local resources. The name of that shelter escapes me at this moment, but I'll find it. And we'll put a link to some of the local Jacksonville, St. Augustine, North Florida resources in our show notes in case anybody needs to access those.
That's great.
As I mentioned at the top of the show, today we're sponsored by Organic Living. who makes these amazing all-natural moisture absorbers that I am obsessed with. Anyone who has lived in Florida for any amount of time knows how much humidity we have here in the Sunshine State. And if you're a mom, then I'm sure you've experienced the absolute sheer joy of realizing the kids have left damp towels or wet clothes or sweaty sports equipment in the bathroom, or even worse, in the back of your car. Organic moisture absorbers is the all-natural answer to those stinky, smelly moisture problems. The all-natural absorber blocks have a very subtle, fresh smell to them. It's almost unnoticeable. They just smell clean. And they're the perfect for keeping all those humid areas of your home nice and dry. And they last forever. So instead of having to empty a tub of chemical sludge every few months, you can set them anywhere you'd like to keep dry and fresh and not even think about it again. We'll put a link to their site in our show notes, but you can also visit organicliving.com to learn more or to place an order. So let's shift gears here for a second and talk about marriage. And those of us who feel like our relationships are pretty good, even after the last 18 months, like we mentioned, all our stressors. So first of all, like, what are some suggestions you have to help increase communication with your partner? Because I think even those of us in the best of marriages can always do better. And so let's talk first about communication and what some tips you have.
Okay, sure. So I think spending time together, intentional time, if at all possible. This has been very difficult through the pandemic, but now if you feel comfortable leaving the house, going someplace, but spending intentional time with each other where you set aside phones, you don't have, you're not trying to scroll and do that sort of mindless stuff, but you're actually trying to talk to each other and not talk to each other about necessarily like the problems and the nuts and bolts and what needs to be done and this type of stuff or stuff about the kids, but more just talking about just you, the two of you, and whatever else that comes up, and saving sort of like the nuts and bolts for a different conversation. But I think having intentional dates and trying to keep up with them frequently, it's so hard, especially when you have kids, because you got to coordinate all the schedules, get a babysitter, then you're paying the babysitter, paying to go out wherever. And, it's so easy to just be like, oh, we'll get there. But trying to do regular date nights and making that sort of a priority is a big thing. I think that I kind of mentioned the nuts and bolts conversation, but having regular check-ins where you talk to each other about like the upcoming schedules and like what needs to be done or what appointments and that type of thing. And having like a 15-minute even check-in where you go over each other's calendars or you just check in, and maybe sometimes there's not a lot to go over, and then there's sometimes there may be a lot that needs to kind of like be talked through, but that's sort of like a separate conversation than your date times. Like your date time should try to be just more of just like positive conversation, and then you set aside those check-ins to where you talk about the things that are, the household, kids, all that kind of stuff.
Those date nights are so, so, so important. And my, as not a therapist or a coach, one tip for newly married or married and adding children to your family is a shared digital calendar. It has saved so many things, so many times. And I'm a paper planner person, and I was very resistant to the digital calendar. And fast forward 2 kids and 20 years. And I now put everything on it. Crazy sock day, it's on the calendar. Everybody knows everything. Right. It looks insane, but I can click to the day. I can see what everybody, who's traveling, who has a late pickup, who has a club after school. Do we have a sports thing? And everybody can access it. So before my husband even says like, can we go to dinner at my mom's house this weekend? He knows to check the calendar and see what's going on. So
that's great. That's smart.
Shared digital calendar. That's my only tip. That's all I have.
This is it.
That's it.
My nugget.
That's it. That's my one thing. So how does the needs of a marriage and a relationship change after 5, 10, 15 plus years? Because it's very different. You're newly married most likely don't have a lot of little ones running around to fast forward to that empty nest period. Sure. Talk to us a little bit about that.
I think that, I'm only 10 years in, but I think that the communication is so important at all these different phases and stages of life if you can stay in communication with your partner and know where they are and know where you are, what they need and what's going on with them, and having that space and that, to be able to talk openly and honestly with each other. I think that's really important. I also like within that, as things change, our individual goals and our dreams and things that we want for ourselves change, but we also have couple goals and family goals. And then, like you said, maybe when there's empty nest, the family goals are different, look differently, but sometimes it's helpful to not just have your own goals in your head, but put it on paper to share it with your significant other, but also what are we wanting to do? What is our family or our couple goal? What are we working towards right now? And again, that changes as the years pass. So it's that communication and staying in touch with each other, I think is so important.
Absolutely. And that communication stretches from, before you're married, when you're dating, all the way as the end of time.
Yes.
So what are some things couples can do to strengthen their marriage?
So I think some of the things I've kind of touched on, I think are important and kind of really apply to this as well, the dating each other. Because I think a lot of times with the women I talk to, that's sort of gone out the window because, just life is happening, kids, it's just, a lot. And so that's where there has to be almost a shift in your mind, in both of your minds, about the priority. This is really important because it seems like, oh, we're going to go out to dinner, big deal. But it really does make a big difference, because before you had kids or whatever, you were together dating. It's you still have to make the effort, and it is effort, but make the effort to date each other, right? To show up and thinking about when you were dating. Sometimes we get dressed up and then we, it's in that, maybe not every time you go on a date, but having occasional times where you do dress up and, because it's thinking about when I was dating him or her, how was I then? And trying to do that again, it's that, I think the intention of wanting to put your best foot forward, and all of that. So I think that's one. Within that, I think, if you're going out, is trying new restaurants, trying something new, because again, I think it's easy to be okay, it's not a big deal, but trying something new and exploring and even a new restaurant, it's just something different and it's something to talk about and it's something you're experiencing together. And you may have a great meal, or you may be oh, and laugh about it, but it's just having these experiences that really these things that really enrich life, enrich our lives. And the other thing I would say is just having, I think, to strengthen your marriage, you have your time together, your dates are important, but it's really important for you each to have your own thing too, your interests, your hobbies. You have your own friends that you spend time with, or at least a friend or two. It's great to spend time with your significant other, and that is important, but it's also, you are an individual and you have your own interests and hobbies. And if you don't feed into those cups get dry and there's nothing in them. And then it usually creates problems after a while. So spending time by yourself, or with a friend or two, or even family that you're close with, is really important as well, I think, to strengthen the overall marriage.
Those are some really good suggestions. And those little things are so important.
Yes, it does. They make a big difference.
They do. And it's funny to talk about, going out, trying new restaurants. And like you said, we're starting to ease back into society. But the beginning of the pandemic, when everything was shut down, man, it was hard.
It was very difficult. Yes.
It was, I remember we did takeout on Fridays, and my husband and I would go pick it up together, just the two of us, because our kids are older, so they can stay home alone. This is way back when we were first in hardcore lockdown.
Yes.
And that was like it. That was our date. It was like a 15-minute ride to go pick up our food and come to from someplace new. We always pick someplace new in town that we hadn't tried for takeout. And I mean, it was not enough, but it was enough for the time. It got us through. So,
right.
But it's those little things that make a difference.
Exactly.
So now let's talk about unhealthy behaviors in a marriage, and talk to us about things that may not stand out necessarily. Obviously, we talked a little bit about abuse and dangerous situations, but let's talk a little bit about some of those less obvious situations and how we can deal with them.
So, like you mentioned, we kind of talked about some of those bigger ones that might stand out. I think that the controlling, the cleanliness can be a little more sneaky. I think sometimes as we are with someone, there's like an emotional disconnect, which is so common. And for a lot of the women I work with, it's like they don't feel like their significant other is meeting their emotional needs. And a lot of times it just really boils down to communication, understanding each other. You think of like the love languages. I mean, that's not the end all be all, but it kind of is a very good sort of like template to like go off of, to try to have an understanding and start developing a level of self-awareness that, not everybody wants hugs, and that's just not going to fill them up. And I think that's really important. So I think, that emotional disconnect is definitely unhealthy. And I think it's just trying to figure out what the other person needs, understanding what you need, what's going on with them, which I think takes, again, that level of communication, of just being able to be open and honest and be able to express yourself, from a place of love, calmly, and try to also get the healthy that they will engage and express themselves, or be open enough to explore that, so how you can connect and connect and meet each other's needs, basically.
Those are some good ones. And I think that emotional disconnect, when we talk about the longevity of a marriage, I think that's definitely something to watch out for, that kind of snowball effect, and that it starts small and doesn't seem like a big deal. And that as the years roll on, if it's not addressed, it can really become an issue.
I think you're 100% right. I think I've seen it can really, I think at the worst, there's like the infidelity. It kind of starts to open the door for infidelity. And I think that's where trying to have that awareness earlier on, and, figuring out how you can express to your partner that this is what I need, this is what I'm missing. I need this, whatever, for you. And hopefully that they will, work at meeting those needs, and vice versa, because, we may not be meeting certain needs that they have. But I think, yes, the longer it goes on, the worse, more difficult it is. But I think, again, it's that intentional, right? Because relationships, any kind of relationship it's work. It takes effort. It takes intentional effort every day to keep it in the healthy zone. And of course, relationships sometimes will, there's always ups and downs. So I think the intentional effort of working at it, and, that idea of I'm choosing them, I'm choosing to love them every day and work at this. And I want them to be happy in this relationship. So how can I meet their needs, and vice versa? How can they meet my needs better?
And do you notice a difference at all in the way that manifests based on the age of the woman you work with? I just feel like my daughter's 11, and I look at her group of friends, and they're kind of like little spitfires that don't take any crap from anybody. And I don't ever remember myself being like that at that age. Certain characteristics, but just their overall, I just feel like in the last, 10-ish years, it's become okay to admit that you need more, and to admit that your needs are not being met. And whereas older generations may not have reached that. It's hard to ask this, but do you understand what I'm asking?
Yeah, no, I think I see different sides with women. I see women that as they've gotten older, they're they realized it's sort of like, I'm like sort of owning their power and like, I'm not taking this. But there's a lot of that people pleasing that women are just so good at doing, the whole people pleasing. So they keep like putting their needs on the shelf, back on the shelf, back on the shelf, taking care of everybody else. And a lot of times I've seen with women, like they kind of get to like, they can get to a breaking point where they're like, I can't. And then it's like, I need to, well, I can kind of go to different extremes, but like, I have to take care of myself. Like I need to take care of me. And sometimes your family was like, whoa, like, but I think I have worked with women that are just, they have just put their needs on the back burner for so long that they are just like so empty and really need to pour into themselves. But it's finding that balance so that you don't go off like the deep end in your family. Like your family's like, what happened? But definitely, I think you're right. I think that there is, it is just a different, like with our younger kids growing up, there is a difference going on, and maybe more a push to like for girls to be assertive, where like the women I work with in like their 30s and 40s or so, there's still that so much of the people pleasing that they've grown up with. And then I can get into whole like attachment, right? Like attachment stuff, comes up for couples and for, just how we attach in any relationship. But yeah, I definitely see big differences in the ages. Yes.
Very, very interesting. We probably could do a whole another episode just on that, because things like that fascinate me. And I know you always want to do better by your children, but I just feel like our kids are so much more aware of mental health and the importance of it. And it's refreshing, honestly, to see a whole new generation growing up, not afraid to tell you, what they need in terms of being healthy mentally.
Yeah, it's amazing. I love it.
Yeah, I love it too. So you have a tip sheet, and we're going to put a link to it in our show notes, 20 tips for a better relationship or better relationships. Tell us a little bit about that.
So some of the tips we discussed today, but basically it's just I put together just from working with women through the years and different relationships. A lot of the relationship tips will apply to not just romantic relationships, but they're just really basic things that sometimes we just don't think about, and these little tweaks, sometimes we just feel so like, we kind of feel a little bit helpless, and communication is such a huge, broad topic. So it's kind of like scaling it down to like really actionable, like what can I even do today differently in my relationship that will make it better and to make it a healthier relationship.
That's great. And we'll definitely put a link to that, like I said, so that everybody can access it and download it and have a little bit of coaching at home. So what is your favorite thing about being a mom in Jacksonville?
Oh gosh. So, I grew up on the beach side, but I just love there's just something about I just believe that nature is just so healing if we just pay attention to it. I just believe that it's all around us, and it's easy to forget about it, but just all the beautiful parks we have, like the state parks, the like I said, the beach, just there's so many like activities that we can do outside in nature. And it's great for like families, for the kids, exposing them to things. Jacksonville, I feel like has so much rich, like outdoor, family friendly things like that to, immerse yourself in nature. And I really love that about the city.
I do too. I think that's a great answer. And I just feel like there's such a diversity of outdoor activities you can do here. Yes. And now is the perfect time of year because it's actually not 1,000 degrees outside.
It's so wonderful. I know.
So anything else you have for us before we close out today?
No, not that I can think of. Thank you so much, Shannon. I've really enjoyed this. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you, Maria Inoa from Maria Inoa Coaching, a relationship coach. And we're going to put a link to her website in our show notes. And so if you have any other questions, you can find her on social media or at her website.
That's it for today. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Jacksonville Momcast. For more information about what you've just heard, check out our show notes and find us on Instagram at Jacksonville Momcast. If you've enjoyed this episode and know someone who should tune in, please subscribe and share it. We look forward to you joining us on our next episode of Jacksonville Momcast.